The pews have blood on them. Alabama is known to be a conservative and heavily Christian state. My small town Tatter Saw was no exception to this. The small, tight-knit community housed a massive church where the townsmen would gather on Sundays. Everyone was there. The younger kids would sing terribly in the choir, the parents would gossip, and the older people would sit toward the back in a silent prayer. My family always attended and participated. For the longest time, I really did believe in God. Truthfully, I thought there was a happy afterlife. I know much better now. When I was about 12, the church burned down. At first, it looked like an accident, but after the small local police investigated, it was determined that it had been set ablaze on purpose. I think that is when the town started to fall apart. My younger sister Kayla was really upset and would lash out at her friends. My mom would leave every Sunday to go visit her friends, craving the weekly gossip session. A proud 12-year-old boy who thought I was too cool for everything, just continued with my life. But as I entered high school, my buddies and I felt the need to prove that we were cool. Truthfully, I just wanted the girl to like me. Hannah Miller, one of the sweetest individuals you'd ever know. She was pretty, had wavy brown hair, sparkling green eyes, and an alternative sense of style. She was really into grunge, stuff like Audioslave, Soundgarden, and even bands like Bush. Not only that, but she was super into video games and anime, which just made her even cooler in my eyes. I guess being a teenage guy, I just didn't think that many girls played video games and were into anime. So naturally, I wanted to impress her. There was the rite of passage type thing for the high schoolers in Tatter Saw. If you could stand 10 minutes in the old church rubble, you were seen as cool and brave. What normally happened was there was a set date that a lot of the freshmen and sophomores would go to the church and take turns doing our time. Some of the juniors and seniors would show up, but it was only to time us and make sure we all did it. Friday, October 18th, 2019. I loved it when my mom hosted the weekly gossip sessions. Whenever it was her turn, she would have everyone over on Friday night instead of the normal Sundays. She'd order pizza and sodas for everyone, which was more than enough. My sister and I would have friends over. My dad and his buddies would sit out on the back porch, and my mom would gossip in the dining room. Since it was Friday, my friends were allowed to spend the night, provided we were a little quiet. It would be me, Zach, Connor, and Stanley. We had been friends our entire lives, and they were the only people who knew of my thing for Hannah. When the four of them arrived, we rushed upstairs to my room to play on my PlayStation. Slamming into my room, my friend Zach spoke up. "So you gonna talk to Hannah tonight?" "Hell no, I can't talk to her, dude," I retorted. "If you don't, she'll never notice you," Zach sang out. "Dude, when she sees me tonight, she'll fall in love with me." Unbeknownst to the rest of the group, I was planning to stay much more than 10 minutes in the church. The rest of the night went by in a blur. We sat in my room, eating pizza and chugging down Sprite and Dr. Pepper. At about 10 seconds, I could hear our guests leave. Only my family, my friends, and my sister's friends were left in the house. An hour later, my friends and I snuck downstairs. My dad was still up watching some late-night baseball game. His head craned back at us, narrowing his eyes at us. "Where are you off to?" "Convenience store," I lied. "Okay, whatever." He went back to watching his game. The four of us left quickly, and I made a mental note to stop by the store on our way back. I figured I might as well stop and grab some snacks. We hopped on our bikes, not wanting to walk a mile in the middle of the night, and took off. Stars lit up the night sky, making for a pleasant and peaceful night drive. It wasn't long before the faint sound of hustle and bustle filled the once quiet night. When we arrived, a handful of others were already there. I glanced around nervously, trying to spot Hannah, preferably without her noticing my staring. When I couldn't make out her dark wavy hair, I gave up. As the night went on, more of our friends showed up. Eventually, Hannah and her friends arrived. She was a little more dressed up than normal, adorning a dark red top with black ripped jean shorts. Jewelry decorated her neck, and I swear my heart skipped a beat. I received a little teasing from Connor, but I shoved him off and told him to shut up. Soon enough, the seniors and juniors arrived, and we began the ceremony. Jacob Riley did his trial first. The front and right side walls were still standing, and the other two were practically falling in on one another. As the sophomore disappeared behind the walls, One of the seniors started the timer. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. I stood shoulder to shoulder with my friends, like soldiers lined up for war. Hannah stood a few feet away, but she didn't seem nervous or scared. I tried to convince myself that I wasn't either. Not 10 minutes later, Jacob came tumbling out of the building. He was only in there 4 minutes, according to the seniors. He was winded, shaking, and I swear I could see tears streaming down his face. He was mumbling about a person, someone standing in the church. He didn't say goodbye to his friends, didn't speak to anyone, and just took off on his way home. A couple of other kids got scared and chickened out. I refused to, since none of my friends left and Hannah wasn't leaving. A few other kids went before me, all coming out the same way Jacob had. So far, none of us had made it to 10 minutes. Our numbers quickly dwindled, with more kids getting scared and leaving before it was their turn. When Connor's name was called, a big smile painted his face. "Fucking finally!" He cheered, marching up to the building and disappearing behind the wall. A minute went by, then another and another. A little while later, the seniors began to cheer. He did it. 10 minutes. Halsey Swindle, the senior with the timer, was cheering. We yelled into the building, telling Connor he had served his time and it was over.
We didn't get a response.
"Oh well, Richard. You're up next," Halsey called out. I took in a shaky breath, not ready to enter the building. A part of me was afraid that Connor was hurt and couldn't get out. The building was so unstable after all. Either that, or he was hiding out and waiting to scare whoever went next. A feeling of overwhelming dread washed over me as I stepped up to the building. I took a few deep breaths, glancing back at my buddies. They gave me a few short nods, and I briefly caught Hannah's eye. She smiled brightly at me, and suddenly, I had the courage of Link from the Zelda games. I walked through the doorway, disappearing behind the wall and unknowingly sealing my fate. When I walked in, I noticed the number of rooms that were still standing. My guess was that Connor was exploring one of the rooms and just didn't hear us yelling at him. I walked around a little, taking in the once beautiful building. The walls looked similar to the outside, but the walls were wood and not brick. Trash littered the floor. A few wooden planks could be seen, and the furniture was coated in dust. The altar was standing, but the upper left portion of it was missing. It almost mimicked the way the outside of the building looked. The only things that were without damage were the pews. They had always been a dark wood, and even after the few years it had been, they stood strong. "Connor, dude, where are you?" I called out. I figured it would be much easier for him to hear me calling out inside the building. When I didn't receive a response, I began to walk through the building. "Okay, man, not funny." I peeked through the doorways of rooms, searched under the pews, and eventually made my way to the altar. I stood behind the stand, glancing out over the sea of empty pews. It felt eerie, like I was preaching to a ghost church. I couldn't see the members, only preach and pray they could hear me. A sense of dread washed over me, a shiver running up my spine. I looked toward all the doorways and corners of the room, believing that something or someone would be standing in the corner. I walked back down the steps and took a seat in the front row of pews. I sat there in silence, trying to listen for any sound of life. The entire church was silent, like there wasn't a living thing in the building. I began to think, had Connor snuck out while I was wandering around? I called out again, but was met with the same eerie silence. A few minutes went by. I was praying my time was almost over. A loud crash pierced through the silence, and I shot up, whipping my head around to one of the rooms. "Connor!" I yelled, running over to where I believed the noise came from. I entered a small side room. It had once been a large storage closet, holding the musical instruments for the church. Oddly, the pieces still sat in the room. A large piano, a guitar, and several boxes blocked my view of most of the room. It hit me that anyone could be hiding anywhere in this room. I slowly advanced, peeking behind each box to make sure nobody was hiding. I stopped in my tracks when the sound of soft sobbing hit my ears. "Dude!" I sped over to a large box in the corner, seeing Connor hiding behind it. He had his hand over his mouth as if he was trying to silence himself. "What the hell happened to you, man?" He had blood on his hands, and I noticed a large gash on his arm. I grabbed him, trying to pull him up. My mind was running a million miles an hour. My only thought and goal was to get the hell out of the church. Connor was mumbling something under his breath, but I dragged him out of the room and into the middle of the church. As we were walking out, Connor stopped. I thought he had stopped, and I snapped my head around, about to yell and demand an answer. Behind us, a man in a long robe had Connor's arm in a vice-like grip. He ripped Connor out of my arms, shoving him into a row of pews. Blood coated the dark wood, and Connor let out a guttural scream. The man turned his attention back over to me, and I bolted. Fear crashed through my system as I left the church, hearing the sound of the seniors cheering. "Yo, Dick, you did it!" Zach came to my side, his smile dropping when he noticed the blood on my hands. I choked something out. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Dick, hey man, talk to me. What's going on?" Zach sounded concerned, and the rest of the kids that were standing around all huddled over me. Hannah was nowhere to be found. "Connor, shit, man." I was trying to catch my breath, adrenaline still rushing through me. Fuck, there's some dude in there. He cut Connor on the arm. I looked at my hands, seeing the crimson red coating my hands. Connor's blood. "What?" Stan whipped a pocket knife out. "Where the hell did he get that? Had he had it the whole time?" My head spun with questions. He marched up to the church doors, storming inside with his knife drawn. A few minutes went by and Stanley didn't return. We all were worried beyond belief, but nobody was willing to enter the church. Nobody except me and Zach. We walked over to the entrance, pushing our way in just as Stanley had done. I don't know how to describe the inside of the church. The once eerie and ominous feeling was replaced by dread and fear. On the floor was some symbol, drawn in white chalk. On 2 pews sat 2 bodies, Connor and Stanley. Zach rushed to Connor, shaking him violently and begging for him to wake up. I just stood there, unable to move. My feet felt rooted to the ground. My breathing became heavy. Standing by the altar was the same man, dressed in a dark robe and watching me and Zach. I moved on my own. I rushed down the aisle and up the stairs. The man ran off, disappearing into the room and eventually out a back door. I chased him to the edge of the woods, yelling and screaming at him. Several figures were standing along the edge of the woods. Is that how they managed to get that scene set up so quickly? What were they even trying to do? When they disappeared into the night, I felt hopeless. I walked back into the church, ending up in front of the altar once more. It was like some twisted ceremony. 2 bodies, a strange symbol, and a screaming man who had just lost his friends. It was no longer the preaching and praying to the ghost church, but summoning something terrible. I didn't realize I was crying until Zach came to stand next to me. "What the fuck?" he whispered. "I don't know. We need to call the cops," he sounded unsure. "Yeah." The room fell silent again. We walked toward the door, Connor and Stanley both still on the pews. When we left, 2 seniors grabbed us by the shoulders, demanding answers. "What the fuck? What happened?" Caleb Marshall, a low-grade senior, demanded. "Call the cops." We refused to give any more answers. He seemed reluctant, but gave in. It felt like an eternity before the cops arrived. When the police arrived, they separated us. Zach and I were taken for questioning, and 2 officers went into the building. We explained our side of the story. The rest of the kids were in a separate area, explaining that we hadn't told them anything. Right after they entered, the 2 cops came back out. "There ain't nothing except some blood." John Marshall, Caleb's father, walked over and informed the others. "What? No, that's impossible." Zach spoke for the 2 of us. "It just looks like some old church kid, nothing more, nothing less." Cable soon joined us, curious to what his dad had seen, or what little his dad had seen. "Where is Connor and Stan?" "It's Connor McLean and Stanley Kelsey." Me and Zach did everything we could to aid the police. But Mr. Marshall was firm, nothing was in the church. Eventually we gave in, the police wouldn't move. A part of me wanted to go back into the church, figure out if the cops were lying or if the bodies had disappeared. Zach and I went back to my house after that. The cops were kind enough to drive us home. Our bikes were left discarded at the church. I know I couldn't bear to look at them. Not with the knowledge that Connor and Stan had rode on 2 of those bikes just a few hours prior. My mother chewed me out that night. She was wide awake in her pajamas and gave Zach and me both an earful. I was glad she didn't ask about Connor or Stanley. I think she just assumed they went back to their place. She never asked me about it later on. The 2 of them were marked as missing, not dead. I knew better, of course. I had left Connor to die after all. It haunted me, knowing that I might have changed the outcome of the night. It's not something I want to talk about. It was odd. Nobody talked about Connor and Stanley. Their families were quiet, wouldn't speak to anybody. And eventually the McLeans moved away. I'm not sure what happened to the Kelseys. But there was a rumor about the mother taking her own life. I don't know. I couldn't bring myself to keep up with it. Too haunted by my experiences. Kids at school talked, but it was more rumors. They were absurd, of course. Stuff about Connor and Stanley running away because they were secretly in love was the biggest rumor. There was only one person who asked me about it, Hannah Miller. She came up to me about a week after the incident, pulling me away from the few friends I still had. "I'm sorry about your friends," she started. Her voice was like honey, and I didn't mind talking to her about the ordeal. It's not fine, but I trailed off. I didn't know what it was. "I hope they rest well." My head snapped toward her. How did she know they were dead? Yeah, me too. And that was the end of it. We talked a little more about some stupid math homework and made plans to hang out after school to work together. I'm a little nervous about meeting up with her, though since she wants to meet up at the old church, I pushed my fear down when she batted her lashes at me. She knew what she was doing. We agreed, and after school I made my way to the church.